In a previous video, I discussed why I didn't think macOS 10 Cheetah was a great operating system on its own, and a lot of people were surprisingly intrigued by that video and agreed with what I had to say about the operating system. The same sentiment I had towards macOS 10 Cheetah was shared amongst Mac users and tech analysts alike, and even Apple agreed so much that 6 months later they ditched Cheetah and put out Puma as I assumed some kind of apology for botching the start of a new generation. Today I shall answer the question of whether or not Puma was good enough for me to accept their apology, so stay tuned. Hello everybody and welcome to Let's Test Operating Systems, where today I apparently jumped the gun and broke the show's format like an idiot. Oh, also we're talking about macOS 10 Puma today. The second release of what's considered modern macOS. Much like Snow Leopard and Mountain Lion, Puma didn't really set out to change much. To be fair, that was the goal of Cheetah's updates too, but there's only so much you can do to one operating system before you have to consider it something completely different. Even though Windows 10 came out in 2015, version 1507 and 22H2 are a near night and day difference. That's the last positive thing I'm saying about Microsoft in this video, though. I mean, Puma still managed to beat Windows XP to market, baby! Something I only realized during my research for this video. Much like Cheetah, though, I have basically zero personal attachment to Puma because I never used it growing up, and spoiler alert, I'm gonna say the same thing in the macOS 10 Jaguar video. If you bought a new Mac between 2001 and 2002, though, you might actually remember this OS. Cheetah was pre-installed on one of the Quicksilver Power Mac G4 models, but the trend spread to the rest of the product line when Puma shipped. I personally have two systems that came with Puma, an iBook G3 from 2001 and my iMac G4 from early 2002. For this video though, I elected to use the same Power Mac G4 from the Cheetah video as well, since that's the accurate experience people were getting coming from OS 9 and older. Apple also relented on the price this time, making Puma a $20 upgrade, unless you attended the keynote where they announced it, or happened to stop by an Apple store at the time, when you could get it for free. I'm sure the only reason it was $20 was because this was the still era when you had to print CDs and send them out, and that costs money. For that money, you would get a bunch of new features. Probably too many to list here, so we'll put a pin in that for when I actually test the OS. The ultimate goal of this release seems to have been to add all the things they forgot to put into Cheetah, like the DVD player we were all promised, and a system that doesn't take 3 times as long to boot up as macOS 9. Granted, macOS 9 was a lighter operating system, but part of that is because the classic macOS was built in a cave with 128 kilobytes of RAM. The fact that it even worked by the turn of the millennium was a miracle in itself. macOS 10 Puma received 5 major updates after its release, the last version being, as you might expect, 10.1.5. For this video I'll run both the first and last releases on my G4 tower, as well as getting a sample of 10.1.2 as it appears on my iMac G4. Except not really, and you'll find out why later. I don't have much else to say, so let's boot up macOS 10 Puma and see what all the hype was about. macOS 10 Puma starts exactly the same way as Cheetah does. Same Happy Mac, same loading animation, and same intro video, except they retimed it a bit. Here's a comparison for those who are curious. Since the last video, I apparently upgraded the RAM on the Power Mac G4 from 768 megabytes of RAM to a gigabyte. As such, I decided to retime the startup with the system. macOS 9 currently takes 37 seconds to start up with the current config, and Cheetah takes about a minute and 15 seconds now, which is definitely faster than it performed in the past. macOS 10 Puma got 2 tests. The first one gave me a minute and 13 second boot up time, but that didn't seem right and I second guessed myself. The second test I did gave me a 49 second boot time, and that seems a lot more like a Puma startup time, so I may have to call the first one a fluke fluke because it wasn't a cold boot. If you choose not to enable auto login, you can see the new login screen, which is a massive improvement over the old one. The text is more readable, and by default it uses a user list. Yeah, take that XP. Moving on, the new desktop immediately leaves a better impression than the Cheetah one. For one, the dock extras are completely gone, so now it's mostly just applications down there since they were moved to the menu bar instead, as is the case today. We have a few new additions to the default user experience as well, and Internet Explorer is still here, unfortunately. But hey, maybe we won't have to deal with it in the future. iTunes and iMovie are now included with the system, both of which are ports of their OS 9 versions, and both of which work about how you'd expect them to. System preferences saw a slight redesign, with the options being categorized now instead of being all together in one box. There's also significantly fewer bugs that I can see from using the system normally, and now I can actually put the system in the sleep mode. $20 well spent. All jokes aside, it seems like a lot of the issues I had with Cheetah have actually been addressed, except for the calendar. There's still no calendar. What there is, though, is software support. Because macOS 10 came standard on new Macs at the time, and then became the default way to use a Mac, developers actually had a reason to start porting their stuff to the new operating system. It was at this point that I wanted to boot up the iMac G4 and try 10.1.2 on it, but as I was about to do that, disaster struck. Turns out that sometime between VCF Midwest and the time of me writing this, I shattered the screen. If I had to guess how it happened, it has something to do with the way I handled it, hauling it back home from Chicago in the bed of my truck. Since I know for a fact it was working when I tore down my exhibit. The panels on these computers are made by LG and they're glued to the front bezel piece, so the display, power light, and microphone release all as one package. That's probably the reason why this part runs about $100 online, which is more than I paid for this entire computer. Because of that, it looks like I might have to retire this iMac and get a new one. It pains me to say this because this has been a damn good computer, but I can't justify the cost to replace the screen. Fucking rip my iMac G4. It's been real. Memorials aside, we'll have to skip to the 10.1.5 experience. In the process of installing this update, I decided to install a host of software based on the recommendation of this Mac Rumors thread. Things went smoothly during the update process, and as I was doing some software installs, the system kept running fine and well. I did notice the Internet Explorer kept hanging the shutdown process and preventing me from restarting the computer, so I'd have to force quit the application to do that. I figured that was just an IE issue though, because Internet Explorer, so I won't knock the OS for that. What I will knock it for is the fact that it didn't like my FAT32 flash drive in the slightest. That's unacceptable because nothing went wrong in OS 9. Meanwhile, I was able to rip a music CD fine within iTunes and play it back well. Then I wanted to import my wallpaper library to the system to play with iPhoto. I had to go into macOS 9 in order to transfer the images because Puma is apparently too stupid to recognize FAT32, so I dropped the folder on the root of the hard drive and restarted. Then the testing came to a screeching halt because all of a sudden, OS 10 would just hang on startup. Not entirely sure what happened, but I managed to recover from the failure by deleting the new folder. Once that debacle was settled, the OS was totally usable. It can browse the web, play period-appropriate games, and do professional work. And I think that's what everybody always wanted in macOS 10. It doesn't compromise on what Cheetah had going for it, but now it feels more complete and runs at an acceptable pace. Plus, I think there's enough to do out of the box and it makes the installation worthwhile on its own, since it can do just about everything OS 9 could do. To wrap things up, I think Puma is a solid release of macOS, and it holds up a lot better than Cheetah does. It does retain some of its quirks, and my G4 tower really wasn't having it at all in this video, but it's at least something I can get behind now, and doesn't feel like a public beta, a trap that even modern tech still falls into. Like seriously, is it that hard to just have even a small team of testers on payroll? I still feel like Puma had performance issues though. I don't think it runs anywhere near as fast as OS 9, and things like the system animations don't feel as smooth as they realistically should. I know Jaguar introduced Quartz Extreme, which should mitigate those issues, but that's a discussion to be saved for next time. I'm just saying, I think a workstation from 2000 should perform a little bit better with an OS from 2001. Despite its shortcomings, I still think Puma was a decent OS that was worth using. And hopefully this review will satisfy the guy from the Cheetah video that didn't like me judging the system in hindsight. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the night sky.